Inside this backpack is everything I would have taken with me on an overnight snowshoeing trip this weekend if the weather hadn't taken a turn for the dangerous. Now, I am not afraid to hike in bad weather. In fact, I kind of enjoy it. But dangerous weather is where I draw the line. In the last 48 hours, the Tahoe Basin received around 3 feet of fresh new snow accumulation, with winds ranging in the 35 to 45 mile per hour range and registered ridge gusts up to 100 miles per hour. That's just too extreme for me to be willing to go out into the backcountry. But I was all packed and ready to go, so it's a little disappointing to have to cancel the trip, but at the same time, it's the smart decision. So what I thought would be kind of fun is, as I unpack everything, put it away, so I can repack it again next weekend and try again, is to go over with you some of the changes I make to my winter kit. Now, I'm not going to go over every single piece of gear that's in this backpack because a lot of it I've talked about dozens of times on the channel. It's the same gear I carry all year round. So I want to talk about the things that are winter specific. So what I'd like to do is set the pack aside for a minute and talk about the things that I would have been wearing while I was snowshoeing towards my campsite. So first is my base layer. Now this is the layer that would go next to my skin. So I want something that is comfortable, that is quick drying, and does add some level of insulation, but also allows for breathability and just overall comfort. So these are the Alaskan Hardware base layer from Duluth Trading Company. And there are a couple things about these I really like. Number one, you've got this strip of mesh material that goes down the spine, and also both of the armpit areas are this mesh material. So that allows you to kind of heat dump. So as you're active, as you're moving down the trail, you're sweating, you're building up a lot of body heat. These base layers allow you to kind of dump some of that out into either the open air, if this is the only layer you're wearing, or into your mid layer. Some other things I really enjoy about these base layers: you've got this nice spacious hood and a built-in face covering. So I don't have to carry like an extra buff or anything like that because it's all built right into the top of my base layer. On the base layer pant, you've got these stirrup straps to keep them in place. You put these down inside your boots, and you've got more of that mesh material on the back of the knee. There's a very comfortable, warm base layer. And something I really enjoy about these is that they're so quick drying that they can be the only base layer that I carry. I don't have to carry a spare for when I get to camp because, you know, stop moving, stop perspiring, and within just a few minutes, these are dry. So I can just put my nighttime clothes on top of them without having to carry any extra weight. They are a bit heavier than some of the other base layer options on the market, but I find the weight to be worth it for the comfort and functionality that I get from this base layer. So next are my pants. These are the Cool Clash. These are just a waterproof shell pant, nothing super fancy about them. They're not heavily insulated, which makes them great for while I'm in motion. But once I get to camp, I have to supplement them with some other insulation that we'll talk about a bit later because it's buried in the pack. In terms of headwear while I'm hiking, I just have this very thin Adidas Clima-Warm beanie. It's just enough to keep like my ears warm, keep the top of my head warm, but not so much that my hair gets drenched with sweat. It's very breathable, very quick drying, perfect for while I'm in motion. But again, once I stop, I have to swap it out for something else. In terms of gloves while I'm hiking, I just have these REI. These are windproof, water resistant, not waterproof, fleece-lined, lightweight glove. Find them to be just the right amount of warmth while I'm in motion, while I'm hiking, and even while I'm stopping for breaks, eating lunch and things like that. They're perfect for that aspect, for the active part of the adventure. In terms of a mid layer, I use the Outdoor Vitals Ventus. This is a super comfortable insulated mid-layer, nice big armpit vents to just heat dump while I'm active. This is another one of those items that I'll keep on when I get to camp and just add layers on top of. Now I did make a lighter pack list for all this stuff that I'll link in the comments. Where applicable, I left links to where you can find these products. A lot of my winter gear is old and is no longer made. For example, the backpack I'll be carrying is the Waymark Ember 60 liter, and Waymark as a company no longer exists. So where it's applicable, I added the links on that lighter pack list. A lot of this stuff just isn't manufactured anymore. For a lot of years now, I've been searching for just a perfect winter boot for me. I've tried 2 or 3 different makes and models that all either failed or were just inadequate in certain categories. Either they weren't warm enough, they weren't waterproof enough. Something about them just wasn't quite what I needed it to be. And then I found these. These are the Borealis by Baffin. This is a TPU kind of plastic outer shell with a removable 3-layer insulated liner. I've got a nice tread pattern on the bottom. I have not had a chance yet to take these out on the trail, but I'm really excited because they literally checked all my boxes. They are not leather, which was important to me. They are heavily insulated, which was very important to me. These have what Baffin calls a tundra rating, which allegedly they have tested between 14 and negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit. So should be plenty warm for the winter adventuring that I go on. You've got crampon and snowshoe compatibility. On paper, these check all my boxes. I cannot wait to actually get them out into the snow and test them out and report back to you how I feel about them. I found these from a Justin Outdoors video. He has a pair, he's taken them out a couple times and made a video or 2 about them. And watching his video, I'm just like, oh, okay, it checks that box, it checks that box, it checks that box. So I bit the bullet and I bought some and just haven't had the opportunity to test them out yet. In terms of socks, I've just got the Darn Tough. Now these are their ski and snowshoe synthetic. They have like a mid-weight in terms of cushioning, that they're very, very warm and they're knee-high. So they do add a little bit of extra insulation to the pant that I'll be wearing, which is not very insulated at all. And lastly, in terms of things I'll be wearing as opposed to carrying, are my MSR Evo snowshoe. Now these are a much older model. They have upgraded nearly everything on this product since I bought these, but I struggle with buying something just because it's new and flashy when I have a perfectly functional piece of gear that may be older, may be outdated, may not have as many bells and whistles, but still like does the job. So until these fail me, I'll keep using them, and then when that happens, I'll look and see what the new fancy bell and whistle model looks like. Now on to the stuff that is in or on my pack, depending on where things go. Got a shovel. This is a really important piece of gear, and I think it's something that is often overlooked by backcountry enthusiasts who are maybe new to getting out in the winter or new to getting out into the snow. In my mind, this is an essential piece of gear that you never leave behind. You want to be able to have something to clear your tent pad. You want to be able to have something to dig yourself out in case you get in trouble in terms of like an avalanche or something like that. I've even used my shovel to dig my car out of the trailhead. If I was out overnight and it snowed a lot and my car got stuck, this is an absolutely essential piece of gear. There are dozens and dozens of them on the market. Some are lighter than this, some are more expensive than this, some are cheaper than this. This is the one I have. It's just backcountry access. I think I got it at REI several years ago. And it's just another one of those trusted pieces of gear that, even though there may be objectively better things on the market, the one I have works and I don't need to change it. In the front pocket here, I have one more piece of gear that I could potentially wear while hiking, and that is just a Gore-Tex rain shell. Now this I would just keep on the outside of my pack if it started to snow, or if I got too cold and I just wanted a quick extra insulation layer. This is something I can just pull right out of the back of my pack here, throw it on, help retain a little bit more of that body heat or prevent my mid layer from getting soaking wet. Hygiene kit, not much to talk about there. I keep this on the outside of my pack all the time, regardless of the season, because when nature calls, I don't want to have to like dig through my pack and try to find it. I just want to know right where it is and be able to grab it immediately. In this little D-bag, I have just first aid kit, some tenacious tape for repairs, things of that nature, sunscreen. Again, just something I want on the outside that I have quick access to. And then the last thing buried down in that giant pocket is the stuff sack for my sleeping pad. And we'll get into why I keep that separate later, but I do carry it because it also doubles as the inflation sack. So that's a pretty important thing to have with you. On this side, I have a Canuck through 1 liter water bottle. This one I'll carry empty for the most part, and I'll fill it up when I get to camp. So I don't want to carry all that extra water weight. And I have 2 other bottles that'll be full when I leave the trailhead. So this one I carry empty. And because the primary water source this time of year is melting snow, I want to fill up as many bottles as I can while I'm melting snow, so I don't have to redo that process over and over and over again. Also on this side of the pack, I have my REI Trail-Made trekking poles with the big old snow baskets. Now I do have a lighter pair of trekking poles that I carry most of the year. I carry these in the winter because they're a little stouter, a little tougher, and they have the big, huge snow baskets. The other ones do not. So over on this side of the pack, I have another Canuck through water bottle. This one will be carried full, and then I have the poles for my freestanding tent. And we'll talk about that when we get further inside the pack. So the last couple things that are on the outside of the pack, on my shoulder strap here, I have the Igneous Nobo, which is another 1 liter water bottle. Just barely fits in that shoulder pouch. Someone needs to design a shoulder pouch that will hold this. So it's a little bit wider diameter on the bottom. So this will be what I'll drink from primarily as I'm walking down the trail. And then on the top here, I have my Nemo Switchback Closed Cell Foam. Now this is the short version, so this is just 51 inches long and 20 inches wide. The reason I carry a short pad for my closed cell foam pad instead of a full length is that I'm a side sleeper. So I really only need that extra insulation boost where my body's gonna be when I'm curled up on my side. All right, so let's dig inside the pack. Now I have this packed in kind of the order that I'm gonna need stuff when I get to camp. So keep that in mind because some of it may not make sense without knowing the method behind my madness. The first thing is my food bag. This is the Mesa XL from Backcountry Exposure, and that's got 2 days worth of food and a hanging kit in it. The reason I carry a hang kit in the winter is I have at times seen bear tracks in the snow. You know, maybe you get that bear who just decided to hibernate a little bit later than his friends, still out there scrounging for food. So I want to play it safe. So in the winter, I do hang my food. My cook kit. Now this is something I really want to kind of dig into and talk about because this is very different than the cook kit I carry most of the year. For the bulk of the year, I carry a Toke's 750 milliliter titanium pot and a pocket rocket for my stove. Very simple, very lightweight, very easy. As I mentioned earlier, on these winter trips, my primary water source is boiling snow. So I want to have a little bit bigger of a pot. So this is the Toke's 1100 milliliter pot with the pan lid. I use the pan lid as a little scoop and shovel to dig through the snow and start that boiling process. For my stove in the winter, I carry the Blade 2 titanium from Fire Maple. This is a remote canister stove, and that becomes pretty important in the winter. Your fuel canisters, these guys that we all carry all the time, perform considerably less well in the colder weather. So having a remote canister stove allows me to invert the can so that the stove can more efficiently burn that liquid fuel that doesn't turn into a gaseous state because it's too cold. One of the things I really like about the Blade 2 is it's got this preheating coil. So it's very, very efficient in the cold weather. It's got a nice big burner. It's very wind resistant. I've used this for a couple years now, exclusively in the winter, and it has yet to let me down. So big fan of the Blade 2 by Fire Maple. One of the next few things, I'm gonna lay the pack down, make it a little easier. So I have, first up, my camp beanie. This is one of the first things I want when I'm done setting up my shelter, when I've kind of done doing all the sweaty activities. This is from Mountain Blaze. You can find them on Instagram. It's a handmade, knitted, custom beanie. I adore this thing. Super warm, reasonably lightweight, very comfortable, and it comes from good people. So I think that matters when you're dealing with backpacking gear that's made by cottage companies. Is just the character of the person who has made the item matters to me. Got my socks that I sleep in. Now these are a compression sock. They are not very insulated, so I'll have to supplement these, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I carry these on every trip now, especially as I get older. Having a compression sock to aid with recovery after long miles on trail or hard miles on trail. Snowshoeing is far more difficult than just taking a hike. So next is my shelter. When I get to camp, first thing I want to do is set up my shelter. This is the Arc Dome by Tarp Tent. This is the one-person version of the Arc Dome. I have not spent a single night in this shelter yet, which is really frustrating. I've set it up in the backyard just to take a look at it and get kind of a first impression. This trip was supposed to be my first field test of this shelter. So now I'll have to wait and see what the weather looks like next weekend, see if I get a good field test, and report back my first impressions after actually using the shelter. Once I get to camp and my shelter's set up and the sun is starting to set, I throw on these Outdoor Research heavy-duty gloves. Now, this is another item that they don't make this particular model anymore. These have nylon on the thumb and the palm, which I prefer. The newer models have traded out the nylon for leather, which I'm not as big a fan of. So I'm gonna hang on to these as long as I can so that I don't have to try to find something comparable that checks all my boxes. This is the first part of my sleep system, and it's in this handy ultralight Sax compression sack. Become a big fan of this particular compression sack. It's done me really well over the last season. Inside here is my 30-degree Enlightened Equipment Enigma sleeping quilt. And I know what you're saying, 30 degrees, that's not enough. We'll get there, I promise. So that is that. Next up is the second part of my sleep system. And this is just in an old compression sack that I had left over from my sleeping bag that I actually gave away to someone who was experiencing houselessness last year, and they needed a warm sleeping bag. I just happened to have one in the back of my Subaru. Didn't have the stuff sack with me, but I gave them the sleeping bag and was left with an empty stuff sack, which just so happens to work perfectly with my 20-degree Enlightened Equipment Revelation quilt. What I like to do on winter backpacking trips is a method called quilt stacking. So the 20-degree will be on the bottom, it'll be in contact with my inflatable insulated pad, and then the 30-degree goes over the top of that like a top quilt essentially. And I do use both sets of pad straps for these, so they're both strapped down to my sleeping pad. I've taken this particular system down into the very low teens and even single digits and been very, very warm. It is a bit finicky at first if you're not familiar with using quilts. I don't necessarily recommend using a quilt in very, very cold weather. But if you are a seasoned pro and you've been using quilts for a long, long time, just, adjusting those pad straps on the two quilts to make sure you don't have any gaps or any drafts or anything like that. But it's a very efficient and very warm system. Now, I do have a 0-degree sleeping bag. It is up here. It's the Mountain Hardwear Lamina Zero. Now, it's generous to call that bag a 0. I think the comfort rating is probably closer to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. These two quilts combined keep me comfortable at lower temperatures, and they are lighter weight. Even though I'm carrying two things, they weigh less than that big old bag. So this is the system I prefer for winter backpacking. I don't recommend it for beginners or people who just aren't familiar with sleeping in quilts, because you could very well end up with a situation where you're getting a lot of draft, you're getting a lot of heat loss. So it's a system that works well for me, but if you're unfamiliar with sleeping in a quilt in the backcountry, I would probably stick to something more like a sleeping bag, a cold weather sleeping bag. I got a lot more sleep system to go. First up is my inflatable pad. This is the Sea to Summit Etherlite XT Extreme. Now, there is a newer model, the XR, and it has a much better pack size and pack weight, but this is another one of those situations where I have a thing that works, and I just can't rationalize spending $280 on a new thing that does essentially the same thing as this perfectly functional piece of gear that I already have. So, the reason I pack it this way, folded up into a rectangle and then tucked into the back panel of my backpack, is that its pack size is ridiculous. It's huge. It's almost as big as my 30-degree quilt when it's compressed. So I fold it up into a rectangle, I slide it down the back panel, gives me a little extra cushion on my back, makes just carrying all this extra winter gear a little more comfortable because I have a little bit softer back panel, and it saves a ton of space. So that is that, and that's why I carry the stuff sack and inflation sack for it separate in the front pouch. I carry a Sea to Summit Thermalite Reactor liner. This is just to add just a little bit more warmth to my sleep system, help a little bit with draft control, and it's just comfortable. It's a nice soft material. I enjoy sleeping in it, worth the weight for sure. And then my pillow is just the Sea to Summit Arrows Premium in the regular size. Same pillow I carry all year long, so not a ton to talk about with my pillow. So the last handful of items in my kit are insulating layers. So once I'm at camp, I want to start adding layers on layers on layers to stay warm. While I've been snowshoeing all day, my body's generating a lot of heat, but once I'm sitting still and the sun starts to dip, it gets cold real fast. So the first thing I'll add, and this will just go over the top of the Ventus, is my Outdoor Vitals Vario. Now this is a full zip jacket. I would call it a mid-layer plus if I had to. It's not a complete outer layer in the winter months, at least. In the spring and summer, this is all I carry as my outer layer. But in the colder months, I would consider this sort of a mid-layer plus, if that makes sense. And then on top of that, also from Outdoor Vitals, is the Loft Tech puffy jacket. I love this thing. They don't make it anymore. They've moved on to different materials, different products, different designs. So this one has been discontinued. But I adore this jacket. This system with the heavier base layer, the mid layer and mid layer plus, and then this outer layer have kept me warm well below freezing. And I trust it. I don't carry like a big parka or anything like that for when I get to camp. I just use layers upon layers upon layers to retain all that body heat. And this system is the best that I've come up with the gear that I own. I'm sure there are warmer systems that other people have. I'd be interested to hear your choices in the comments if you have any. But for me, with the gear that I own, without spending a bunch of extra money, this stuff has kept me very, very warm and very, very comfortable in some pretty miserable conditions. And then inside this ultralight Sax compression bag, I'm a big fan of the ultralight Sax stuff. Between them and Backcountry Exposure, I think they make probably the best bags on the market. So big fan of both of those companies. In here, I have my Enlightened Equipment Torrid booties. Earlier, I talked about how those compression socks didn't necessarily add any insulation or add any warmth. This is where the Torrid booties come in. So these will go over the top of the compression socks. I sleep in these all night long. And then another piece of new gear that I have yet to test. That's 3 total in my kit that I have not gotten to test in the real world yet, are my Enlightened Equipment Torrid pants. I bought these just very recently. They had a Black Friday sale where they were significantly cheaper than their normal price. So I scooped a pair up just for winter backpacking and snowshoeing and things like that. This is another item that I will sleep in. So my sleep clothing will be the same base layers that I hiked in all day. These Enlightened Equipment pants, these Enlightened Equipment booties, and then 1 or 2 of the Outdoor Vitals mid-layer style jackets. If it gets super, super, super cold, I might throw the Loft Tech on, but I have found by and large using the Ventus, which is the quarter zip, half zip mid-layer, along with the 2 quilts and the heavily insulated sleeping pad, has kept me really warm in a lot of pretty miserable conditions. So a lot of this stuff is tried and true. A lot of this stuff I know works. 3 pieces are brand spanking new, and I'm super excited to get to try them out. Fingers crossed I get to do that next weekend. But there it is. That's everything I had packed for a trip I didn't get to take. Again, there is a link in the description of this video to a lighter pack list. I've included links where applicable. So if it's an item that's still in production that you can still purchase, I added a link. If the link is missing, that means that product no longer exists. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope the next video I get to share with you is me using all this stuff on a snowshoeing trip.